Hi everyone, my name's Darryl Panes, CEO at As Good as Gold Australia, and once again I'm joined by my brother Brian and partner
Absolutely.
at As Good as Gold. And today we're rather privileged. We're interviewing a very special guest. He is the author of 3 books: Get the Skinny on Silver, The Silver Manifesto, and Second Chance. He is a keynote speaker at investment conferences all around the world. He's the publisher of the Morgan Report and recognised globally as the Silver Guru. I speak of none other, of course, than the one and only David Morgan. Good morning, David.
Well, good morning to you both, and thank you for inviting me.
Good morning, David.
Can I start by saying, David, that we do live in a very different world. It's very different to what it was when we spoke last in that interview many months ago now. It was about a year ago. And I remember the title of the interview, and it was Load Up the Truck Before the Inevitable Silver Surge. And guess what? Here it is. Overnight, as we speak, overnight silver launched another $1.20, went up $1.20 per ounce, which is significant. And we can expect to see a lot more of this happen from this point onwards.
Absolutely.
Of course, surges both ways, of course,
Yep.
but obviously to see consistent surges in precious metals as we enter this very volatile period. But what I'd like to do here, I've just said that we are in a very different world. However, some things remain the same. And I'd like to bring this to your attention, David, and just see what your impressions are here. I was watching a late night interview, news a few nights ago, and the interviewer was speaking with a gentleman, a representative from Deloitte's major accountants consultancy firm, second biggest here in Australia, I think the biggest in the world. And the interviewer said to their consultant, "If you don't mind, I'd like to ask you a question. It's from my 5-year-old son." I thought, this is really interesting. 5-year-old speaking up. And the Deloitte representative said, "Yeah, no problem at all." And so here was the question. My son has asked, with all of this money that's being given out at the moment by governments, where does it come from? Is it printed, or is it borrowed from overseas countries? And does it have to be paid back? Now, the Deloitte representative said, look, don't worry about any of that. He said, look, it's not borrowed from overseas countries. In fact, pretty much we borrow it from ourselves. And just at the end of World War I, we did something similar in Australia. Our government just borrowed a lot of money, didn't pay it back, nor do we have to pay it back again this time. I thought, you've got to be kidding me. I can't believe what I'm hearing here. So I paused it, rewound, because I thought, David, that I had fallen asleep and not picked up on something here. Sure enough, he repeated exactly the same. And so something drove me to go to I did a Google search on Deloitte, and there it was, 700 people. They had just put off 700 people only a week earlier. And I thought, now, if it was that easy, David, that you could borrow this money and never have to give it back, why did Deloitte put off 700 people? All they had to do was borrow some money, print it, right, and not worry about ever paying it back. And this message, David, has never changed. We know that there is always a price to pay, and we pay the price. Of course it's paid back. We pay the price through inflation and the destruction of currencies. And this is happening on a global basis. But the message that's getting across never seems to change. What are your thoughts about that?
I don't have a lot to add. I think you summarized it very, very well. I mean, you cannot get something for nothing, and yet the whole system is based on that. They print it up or digitize it, get to the computer and put in a bunch of ones and zeros, and they create something that has value for a while, and that for a while can be decades. But
Yes.
during those decades, let's say 100 years, let's go to the Federal Reserve. From the
Yes.
start of the Federal Reserve, which was 1913, but was basically, I think, the 26th of December. So if you go from 1914 to present day, so slightly over 100 years, 120 years, 106 years or so, the U.S. dollar has depreciated from 100 units down to about 2. So it's lost 98% of its value. But since it's been over that 100-year time frame, a lot of people don't even realize it's taken place. It's been insidious enough, and especially in the beginning, after we left the gold standard, or tie to gold from Bretton Woods in August 15th, 1971, I believe, then it accelerated, and the dollar's lost about 85% of its value from that point. And at the beginning, people say, well, it's good. Inflation is good. Look at my salary. It's gone up. Look at my house. It's gone up. Look at, whatever I bought. Look, it's worth more. And that's the insidiousness of it. It kind of sneaks up on people. They don't realize the price until the end. And, at the very end, in some instances, well, many instances, one of my favorite little clips of art that I have on my computer that I use for my Twitter feed or whatever, it's got a guy from Zimbabwe, and it's on a cardboard sign with the currency stapled to it and handwritten. It says penniless billionaire. No, it says starving billionaire.
Yes.
So, he's got $1 billion, but he doesn't have anything to eat because the currency's been printed to worthlessness. And that's the direction we're heading. Now, will the U.S. dollar go to absolute zero? No. A new system will evolve before that happens. But then you've got to look at how does your current net worth transfer into the new system? And that's the biggest question of all. But we know from monetary history that if you preserve your wealth in gold and silver, it's in the past and most likely in the future going to be the best way to bridge the transition between the old system and the new system.
Do you think, David, with the amount of information that's out there at the moment, and there is more, if you research the subject of money, inflation, there's a lot more available to us now than there has ever been. Do you think that there is a greater awareness now of this inflationary trend and destruction of currencies, or do you think it's still only the 1 or 2% that have familiarised themselves with this condition?
Well, it's definitely more because of the internet. And I know that for a fact because when I started on this journey so many decades ago, if you said something radical but true, that the Federal Reserve is a private bank owned mostly by Europeans, and that the federal government has to borrow money from them, and that the responsibility for paying it back is the taxpayer. So your friendly government is borrowing from a private banker, and you're responsible for paying it back. You don't get anything free from government. Somebody's going to have to pay for it, and that's through both taxation and inflation. And the people at the end come out desolate and desperate. The middle class gets wiped out. There's 2 classes. You've got the basic elite or super wealthy and everybody else. And if you don't believe it, then go start doing a little research and start reading some monetary history, because that's the path that we're on, and it's not a pleasant road. So that, 1970s where, inflation was great, my house is worth more, look at my salary and all that, morphs into the reality that you can't get something for nothing. So back at the beginning, nobody knew that the Federal Reserve was a private corporation. Now everybody on the internet knows that. So that alone is a signal to me that verifies that a lot more people are awake, at least that far. And if you extend that into, being like the first foundational step you need to know about how the monetary system works, you can extrapolate there's a lot more people that know about it. Now, knowing about it and taking action, that's a different thing.
Yeah.
And I'll just save that because we'll get into that later in the interview, I'm sure. But I will give you a lot of examples that are very noteworthy, at least to me, on what's happened over the last few months, which, again, you can come back and ask me because I've been in this industry for a long time, as you know, and even I get surprised from time to time.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and even though, no, you're right, even though there's the awareness may have increased, I speak to a lot of very smart people, but they are in business here in Australia and they're finding they're going pretty tough. And in the process, are just not in a position, they don't have reserves. As my mentor, lifetime mentor, Peter Daniels said, look, you've got to have reserves. And most people spend pretty much everything they earn. Yeah, they've got the Porsche in the drive and the helicopter in the, and the helicopter pad in the backyard. And they're just not prepared for these occasions. So, so you're right, and hopefully there's. I feel for people who aren't, because there is no escape from this, as I read it. David, I want to repeat the last interview that we did. We titled it "Load Up the Truck Now Before the Inevitable Silver Surge," and here it is. You were right again. You warned everybody, and you got it right. We may have waited a little longer than what we all anticipated, but here we go. To the extent that even the might of Warren Buffett, just recently, Warren, who has never held gold in high esteem, has referred to it as nothing but a rock. You can't eat it, and of course, you can't eat currency either. Of course, we know that. But Warren has purchased 21 million shares in Barrick Gold, $563 million. Probably not a lot of money for Warren, but it's still a reasonable chunk all the same. Do you think this is a sign of things to come? Those that were, and I'm talking pretty smart, or very smart people, with a lot of money and a lot of influence, do you think we've reached a point now where we're going to see, this is just a sign of things to come, we're going to see a lot more people of that ilk investing in areas, precious metals, where they otherwise would have never considered it?
I think he's one of the first, at least for the public, to realize, that the institutional investor is going to or is moving into this market. And I kind of alluded to a couple of things I wanted to say, so I'll just jump right in. Yep. But when we hit the March, extreme pullback in the metals and the shares, I got a lot of people, a lot for me, that called, and I'll keep this all anonymous, but it was about 4 or 5. And the conversation basically went, David, I listened to you for about 4 years and I've never bought gold. I'm a business owner and I have $1 million cash in the bank and it scares the heck out of me. I want to buy gold. Who do I buy it from? And what do I do with it? And that went from 1 million to 2 million to 4 million up to about 10 million. Right. And for, being mostly on the retail side, I do stuff for hedge funds and, I know some of the billionaires in the industry, et cetera. But the point being that most of my database is retail. So these are people that knew it, but we started the conversation, with the idea with both of you that there's having the knowledge about it, but then taking action. So a lot of people that had the knowledge were not yet convinced or nothing motivated them or whatever. And now they're motivated. So the long answer to your very direct question is yes, yes, and hell yes. And it's just started. Yeah. And this is the problem, because what Buffett bought is less than 1% of Berkshire Hathaway. So think about that. Think about the 200 trillion floating around the financial markets. It's got to get out of stocks or out of bonds and move into something safe. And look at the window of not only time, but the availability. I mean, if there is a shortage, well, let me call it, I want to use the right word. If there's a supply chain problem in the metals, particularly silver, now, can you imagine if the silver demand doubled from where it is right now? Yeah. Well, that's right. I mean, you'd be in the lap of the gods. And I see that happening. I don't know if you know the numbers, David, but you're probably the best person in the world to answer this question. I believe, and I may be wrong,
but I believe that it's only something like 1% or thereabouts of the world's population that, under normal circumstances, invest in precious metals. What I'd like to know, do you know, in 2011 or thereabouts, when everyone, I say everyone, was into precious metals, what percentage of the population was serious or investing in gold and or silver? From 1% to, do you know what the number was?
No, I don't, but I'll make a guess. And I think it's an idea. I think that you're voicing a very important idea. And, you know, people, I've said it several times, I'll say it again, you know, in the United States, dollar as the currency of choice to talk about. I said there'd be more silver bought above $30 than below $30. And I can't prove it, but I can look at the futures table. I can talk to dealers. I pretty much verify what I just said. Most people don't buy low and sell high. They buy high and sell higher, or buy high and ride it up and all the way back down.
Yeah.
But my point is, I'd say double. That's just a wag. It's a wild ass guess, but it's probably fairly true. So if you go to the top of the market in May of 2011 and took that number and then looked at when silver hit intraday 12 on the futures exchange, or maybe going back a little bit before that, I'd say on the investment side, you probably had about roughly half of the participants that you had. In other words, in that, 9-year period, you had a lot of disgruntled bulls that sold their silver, bought Bitcoin, sold their silver, paid their bills, sold their silver, and took the loss against a gain that they had in the stock market or whatever. But directly for your question, I know what the financials are as far as worth of those metals versus the financial system. So all of the gold in the world represents 1% of the total financial system. And all the silver in the world represents 0.02% of the entire financial system. So if you go back to like the 40s when, China came off the silver standard, or maybe I have the date wrong, I think it was, but regardless, when China was the last to leave the silver standard. And you think up until that point, the truth of the matter was if you didn't have silver, you didn't have any money.
Yep.
You didn't have money. So what did silver represent in the financial system? Well, in theory, it represented 100% of the financial system. Now, that's really not true because, when you pay your money and get a stock certificate, that money has gone somewhere else. And I think people are following what I'm saying, that, there's not a storage of silver to equal everything that's out in the economy. I mean, if you build a log cabin with your brains and your brawn, that's wealth, and you didn't have to put any silver or fiat to make that occur. My point is that unless you had to tie the silver up into that time frame, you really didn't have any money. And now, from being in theory a great deal of the financial system, I'll put it that way, a silver standard, to now where it's 0.02%, that is a mind-boggler.
Yeah.
And it's a mind-boggler in a couple of ways. The first way is, what if it got to be 2% of the whole monetary system? You'd have to multiply it by 100. So multiplying the ownership by 100 wouldn't make the price go by 100. The price would probably go by 1,000 if you had that many people coming into it. Mm-hmm. I would say if you doubled the amount to 0.04%, you probably expect at least a double in the price right now. But anyway, I'm hopefully making a lot of sense. I really want to, because people really don't understand that silver is worth buying right now. I mean, if you take it on an inflation-adjusted basis, silver is dirt cheap right now. Yeah, I know it's not 18 anymore. But, all the people that were, said I was a crank and a crackpot and a know-nothing and a get on the Bitcoin bandwagon and all these things would happen over the last 9 years, they had an opportunity.
Yes, they
did. As you said last year, I told them, load the boat, get on the bandwagon, do it. Don't think about it. But as I just outlined, a lot of people, really smart people, got on it right away. These phone calls I just talked about. They were buying pretty much at the last chance before the train started to move. And the train's moving. So now to get on that train, you're going to have to run really fast and jump on board. And then there's going to be a point where that train's moving so fast that you're going to have a jet airplane to get on board. Really move.
Look, I have so many people, David, that are saying, thank you guys so much for just sharing the information as you did, as we have been for years now. But some of these people have invested, typical of the gentleman, the entity you were referring to, but 1 million started with $1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 4 million, and they can't really believe the appreciation of their investment. It's gone from 2 million to 2.8, 2.9 if they sold today, and they're going, wow, this is just over a year. So very spectacular results. I mean, when people get a gist of this, I mean...
People get excited about real estate at 7% average.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for that, David. Great answer.
We'll move on. David, we have an economist that works with us. He's very dominant in Australian economics and in politics. But he's asked me to put a couple of questions together. If they sound a little bit different from my normal questions, you understand they're from John Adams, our economist. So I'll start with the first one. In the coming 24 hours, we will find out how many September 2020 silver contracts will stand for delivery on the COMEX. It is expected that the volume of physical silver which is expected to be delivered will be higher than the 84 million ounces delivered in July. Question. What are your expectations as to how much silver will stand for delivery? Will the bullion banks be able to deliver the requisite amount of silver? And what are the implications for the price of silver in the coming 4 weeks?
Probably do them in reverse order. The price of silver in the coming 4 weeks will be higher, or at least within a trading range. I think it could maintain a trading range here for a while. The amount of silver to deliver is always a difficult question to answer completely, because I don't know how it works in Australia, but here in the States, if you get pulled over and get a traffic citation, it's written on a piece of paper that says notice to appear. So it's a document that says that you have a notice to appear, but it's not an actual appearance. So you can pay that fine at the court and never appear before the judge. So a notice to deliver is very similar to a notice to appear. Just because the notice to deliver is 84,000 or whatever the number was, doesn't necessarily mean that all those are going to be true appearances. The other part that no one, I won't say no one, the hedge funds get it, the refineries get it, but it doesn't seem that the investment community gets it. And I'm not trying to make this right or wrong, because I don't know absolutely. But what I do know for a fact is when silver was sitting there at 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, the refineries had no place to put it. So they delivered it into the vaults as the buyer of last resort, which is basically the bullion banks. And they loaded their shelves with silver at 14, 15, 16. So if you look at the warehouse or vaults that are tied to the COMEX, and you see the last big delivery, it was accomplished. And none of that, I'd say none, but for all practical purposes, none of that silver moved off the exchange. It got moved as a bookkeeping entry from a seller to a buyer. But it didn't get put on a Brinks truck or a Loomis truck or Garda or any of the mobile security vehicles and moved to a different vault. It all stayed in basically the same vault, but there was a bookkeeping entry that took place between that silver and, let's say, the SLV, the largest ETF for silver. So I think right now that it will transition. It won't be that big a number. It could be. And I think it'll go smoothly this time, which is what I'm implying is that the question is, from my perspective, asking me, when does this whole thing blow up? Because at some point it will. or at least I've made that statement for years, and so far I've been somewhat vindicated in from the aspect that there's been extremely difficult periods to get silver and gold, particularly silver, but the market's taken care of it over time and things settle down. The reason I want to be cautious, and basically I'm talking somewhat out of both sides of my mouth, but you asked me specifically September, that's my answer, I'll stick to it. But why has the officialdom from COMEX now allowed almost any hallmark whatsoever to be a viable hallmark for physical? That's never happened before. So basically what they're saying is, you know, if it wasn't from these 4 or 5 refiners that we have mandated on our website and in our paperwork, that if you're not from this hallmark, you are not recognized as a good bar for delivery. Now they say, hey, if you could write with a felt pen and put a hallmark on it, we'll accept it. Now, I just exaggerated for effect. But some of these things from Russia and China really haven't been vetted to the level that all these other hallmark bars have been. And now they're opening it up. So that implies the other side of my mouth, and I hate to answer in this way, but I have to be truthful and I have some knowledge about it, that they need to grasp real physical basically from wherever they can get it. So is it going to happen in September? I doubt it. Is it going to happen in the future? Most likely. What will happen? I could pretty much tell you what will happen. If you've read a contract, it tells you right in the contract that you signed. It says they'll either say force majeure, COVID made me do it. Seems to be a very big excuse these days for almost anything.
Yeah, does it ever? Yeah.
Or we've got a supply chain problem, make up an excuse, you have to settle in cash. Well, wait a minute. I can't put cash through my iPhone factory. I need silver. Well, that's tough. Read the contract. You're just getting settled in cash. But that's not a default the way they see it. Now, the way I see it and the way you probably see it, for other people, it's absolutely a default.
Default, yeah.
But not by the game you're playing. The game you're playing when you sign that contract is, no matter what happens, we win, you lose. And if you can't get the silver or gold or whatever the contract is, it's because in the fine print it says we can settle this contract in cash and it's as good as gold as as you guys are, which of course it's not. The reason as good as gold exists is because nothing is as good as gold.
Yeah.
but the COMEX seems to think that paper's as good as gold, which of course is the whole reason for owning it in the first place.
Very, very nicely put, David. When we decided a name as good as Gold Australia, we said, yeah, that's a good name because it's been around for centuries, hasn't it? Been around since, as long as I can remember, things being as good as gold. It's always referred to as good as gold. Anyway, thank you for that. And I will say to our audience too that, look, as good as gold can supply 1 and 2 bars, next day, not a problem. If you place an order for 50 kilo, 1 kilo bars, they're going to take a little while because it's not quite as accessible as it has been in the past. Leading to the second question from John Adams again. Last week, Eric Sprott, in his weekly wrap-up, and I noticed you were on there just shortly too, so they gave you a good wrap-up, with Craig Henke, indicated that the 35-year manipulation scheme of gold and silver has now come to an end, given the scale of physical gold and silver which is being demanded on the COMEX. Now, this is a continuation of our last question. Do you agree with Eric Sprott's assessment? Is the paper, gold and silver market officially broken?
Well, I would say differently, and the answer I would give is I don't know. What I do know for a fact is it's trading much differently. What I also know for a fact is that the commercials have not changed their short position. They've added to their long position. And I don't have time to explain it. I probably couldn't do that good a job about delta hedging, but if you're interested, you can look up delta hedging on a search engine. But basically, they've locked in their losses. So if you've got short soybeans or soybean meal, for that matter, and the price starts going against you, because you're short, you can offset that contract with a long contract at a higher price, and you lost, X amount of cents per contract. But you're not going to do any worse than that. So we're starting to see that on the commercial side, and we're seeing the open interest drop. So the way I see it is, one is trading much differently. I think the commercials are in trouble. I think that maybe one of the bigger banks has basically left the game, meaning that they're no longer looking to control or manipulate, or my favorite word, manage the futures market. And that it could be, I say could, not would, people, could be due to the fact that some of these banks are under investigation and looking at, the RICO statutes, which means, one of the harshest penalties available. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes that, we can only guess at. Has it been broken? I would say, again, to my previous answer, not yet. I think the September issue is critical. If I'm wrong, I'll be very smiley. I'm not addicted to being right or wrong about a lot of things. And one is, when does the silver market blow apart? But I still think what I said is the truth. And that is, there's been a lot of delivery for years into the silver market from the refiners because they didn't have any place else to put it. If you look at it objectively, which I do, there's a heck of a lot more silver in those vaults than there was, let's say, a few years back. Now, how much is that of deliverable is the question you're asking. The answer is no one knows. But the last big delivery was, taken care of. And September may or may not be. It remains to be determined. I think the thing that concerns me the most, I've said it on almost every interview that's asked me a similar question, is what I learned from Paul Sarnoff in the book Silver Bulls, where he pretty much insisted that there was kind of a double counting of silver. And to be specific, if you look at the ETFs and read their prospectus, they are allowed to take a contract that has a warrant, which means it's moved from the eligible category into the registered category, which is it must have in order to actually deliver a bar, and count that as part of their holdings. I mean, let's face it, the amount of silver that you named that has been taken off the exchanges over the last couple of months is enormous. And yet, if you look at the vaults, very little of it's moved. So are we seeing a situation, I'm asking a question because I don't know, but are we seeing a situation where you're letting the silver rest in the original place, getting a warrant, getting registered category silver on a piece of paper, shipped on over to the SLV and counted as physical? I don't know. But it does concern me.
I think what I do know,
I'm sorry to interrupt. If I was running the fund for physical metal, I would not use any of the approved COMEX warehouses. None.
Yeah.
I'd build my own vault and I'd stick it in there and find out.
Yeah, it gets back to always own the physical. Forget about the paper contracts. Yeah. Look, I think the world and especially the Federal Reserve are in deep strife if we look at silver and gold as money, and which it is money. But if they decided to go back to what worked before, which was physical silver in coinage, right? We don't have enough, right? And no, you just.
Well, let me interrupt you there. I mean, in theory, we have enough if you priced it right.
Oh, the price differently. Sorry, you're
correctly to make it worthwhile. It would actually have to be priced higher than gold.
Yeah,
yes. There's less of it. I mean, let's just do a thought experiment. If you had to do it based on how many units there are, there's about 3 or 4 units of gold for every unit of silver. So in the marketplace, which one would be the most valuable?
Yeah. Jim Rickards would say that it's not the price. It's not how much there is out there. It's the price you put on it. Yeah, exactly. I have one question. I was given one question. I was given quite a few, but this is the only one that coming from me for today anyway. David, presently, 60% of all, or around 60% of all silver mined goes towards industry. With the introduction of electric vehicles, solar energy, and also electronic goods, and combined with increasing demand for investment silver, would you agree with us that the demand will outpace supply and higher prices will be the outcome?
Absolutely. I just did a paper and an interview about I think it's called the Great Silver Crisis. And in that thesis, I stated that we could and probably will get to a point where industry realizes, just like a retail silver purchase, that you're not getting your silver. You got 1 or 2 bars in a day or two, but if it's 50, you're going to have to wait 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks. And most of the supply chain in the industry has been just-in-time inventory, which means the logistics department calls up and says, hey, we need X amount of silver delivered, and that will last whatever they go out, a quarter, 3 months. And then the next quarter, they order what they need. Nobody warehouses or stores any silver on the industrial side, with the exception of, a jeweler or whatever has a supply, of course, but it's meaningless relative to their overall annual business. And so once the investors dry up the market, which it's drying up as we speak, and the industrial users have to go in and buy it, they may realize that they're going to have to be put on hold for a while. They cannot get the supply required to make a product. And that's what I call the Great Silver Crisis, because at that point, industry will start acting like investors, and they'll be buying silver basically to hold on to it, or to hoard it, or to warehouse it, or to put it on the shelves, or however you want to frame it, whatever context you want to think of it. No silver, no production. No silver, no job. No silver, no business. No silver, we're done. And when that hits 3M Corporation, it's going to move over to Apple, and then Samsung, and then Mitsubishi, and then Ford Motor, and then General Electric, and then all your electronics manufacturers, and on it goes. So that run to silver will be twofold. It'll be the investors that start it, but when the supply gets so tight and the delay so long, then you're going to have a second run to silver, which will be from the industrial side or the industry side, that will pretty much dwarf the investor side. Because if 50 or 60% is industry and only 10% is investment, think about that's a 5-fold increase in investment demand, or let's say just demand, that could potentially come into the market.
Yeah. Excellent answer. Thank you very much, David. I'll hand it over to Darryl.
Look, as I was driving in this morning to do this interview with yourself, I just thought I must ask David this question. Something I've never brought up before, but I'm really interested in your response. Silver coins. We are heading into, I believe, a very tumultuous economic environment. We have restrictions of cash everywhere. It's difficult in Australia, David, to withdraw any more than $5,000 in cash. And with some banks, you've got to notify them in advance. I mean, this is really starting to come to this is really becoming concerning. Somebody might have $200,000 in cash in an account and can only withdraw at $5,000 in $5,000 lots. There are less ATMs out there. There are restrictions on our ability, even with internet banking and internet transactions. So for some time now, I'm talking a number of years, 3 or 4 years, I've been using silver coins as a medium of exchange. So some people say, well, okay, that's okay for you, Darryl, because everybody that you are trading with knows that you're a precious metals dealer, and so that's easy for you. But I just tend to disagree with that. And so this is really my question. I go to a supplier of goods and services, and they say, okay, Darryl, that's $200. But what's silver trading for at the moment? They ask me this, what is silver trading for at the moment? I'll tell them, and I'll say, well, let's just do it in silver. And so it might be 4 or 5 coins. It might be on a bigger transaction, 20 coins. But so many of my suppliers at the moment are keen to do that exchange. I think that silver in coins will play a major role moving forward. I mean, it's pretty hard to hand somebody a kilo bar for goods or services that they might have provided, but coins are really handy. So do you tend to agree with me on this? I just think they represent fantastic value. What are your thoughts there?
Well, one, I wrote the 10 rules of silver investing so many years ago. And rule 1 goes something like, no one wants to be the prophet of doom, but in a full-scale financial collapse, silver will be the money of last resort. Gold will be too valuable for day-to-day transactions, but silver will be used on basically a barter basis. So any investor really should start with coins. Even if you're a multimillionaire, you need coins. Will it take place more and more? Yes. Will it be enough to where it makes a difference in the marketplace? I don't know yet. What I do know is that you will see it more and more. And then with the advent of the blockchain, there'll be more and more silver and gold backed cryptos that will be the electronic equivalent that you could cash out, and at least in some cases. So I think it's going to be twofold. I think old school will be using the physical. I think the millennials will be using it on a blockchain. But in both cases, it will put a great deal of silver into circulation that's not there now. And so there's nothing wrong with owning bars. But what I said in the rules of silver investing, you should start small, start with coins. And then as you build up your position, if you want to go to bars, they're a lot easier to stack and count. But if you've got enough wherewithal to buy, 200 ounces of silver, buying 200 1-ounce bars is not the way to go.
Yeah.
No. You're far better off with 200 coins or 400 half-ounce coins or, quarter-ounce coins for that matter.
Yes. Yeah. Now, I tend to agree. The restrictions at the moment, I've got to share this with you too, David. It doesn't really require an answer, but just a client the other day contacted me and said, Darryl, what do you think of this? My mother just invested $30,000 in gold with a supplier, and $30,000. She had about $600,000 to invest, but that was just her first move into the precious metals market. She received a phone call 3 days later. The transaction went through. 3 days later, she received a phone call from St. George Bank. And she was quizzed. She felt like she was in an interrogation. This lady is in her mid-70s. We know where you spent the money. We've done some studies on this company, and we believe that they're a scam. Now, this company's been in a precious metal supply now for about 50 years. We believe that they're a scam, right? And that you may not receive your goods. And she, of course, got really anxious and uptight and responded in the manner that you would have expected. But since then they've said, we've frozen your account. They will not allow her to access any more of her funds. And she's now got to take her son with her to the bank today to try and see if they can transfer the money out of that frozen account into another bank. Now, I don't know if this is happening in the US, but this is not the first time I have heard this, which was the reason I asked you before about the coins as possibly being a medium of exchange, because banks are getting really serious now. They can just withhold your funds because over a situation like this. So do you have anything like that happening in the US, or is it quite prevalent or not happening at all?
Very, very rarely, but okay. I have personally had a couple of clients where the bank called them on a wire transfer and said, hey, you're wiring to, XYZ coin dealer or whatever. Are you sure you want to do it? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the answer, yes, I'm sure I want to do it. And the transaction goes through. But you bring up a very important point, and that is that the safest and easiest way move your money out of a bank is to write a check to somebody like as good as gold, take that fiat and turn it into real money. That way you don't have a $5,000 restriction. You just, if you got 600,000, take 10%, which is 60,000. That woman only went with 5%, which is a good start.
Yep.
But now, if you're going to get a roadblock, what happens, right? But no, it's very, very rare. But I'll comment. I think it's more likely to occur more and more because the word's going to come down from on high that we can't have everybody running the gold. And, a lot of people say, and I was probably said it more than anybody, that when gold really takes off and gold gets to pick a number, 3,000 US or whatever, everyone will run to silver because it's much cheaper than gold. But I'm starting to rethink that, and here's why. You call up as good as gold and you say, hey, I just woke up. I've got $1 million. I'm going to put 500,000 into the metals, and I want to buy some gold and silver. And you say, well, gold is 3 weeks out, but silver is 12 weeks out. What?
Yeah.
Put it all in the gold. I want it as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm just starting to think this through because think about it from the investor's perspective. Things are going to, I think I can swear here, things are going to hell in a handbasket. You've got your life savings in a bank that you don't trust, and they're giving, you're hearing rumors about them being really sticky about getting your own money, right? So you're going to take half of that and convert it into real money. And now you call up a trusted dealer that says, absolutely, but here's the deal. We've got to be upfront with you. Right now it's, 3 weeks on gold and 12 weeks on silver. Well, what would you do?
The sooner you can get your hands on it, the better. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Comment on that. What do you guys think about that idea? Because I've just recently started to think about that.
Oh, look, over here we can get gold at a lesser time frame than silver, especially the bigger quantities. I will say I've got one customer out there. He's been waiting 8 weeks for his silver bars to, a big order, but 8 weeks for the last bit to come on in. So whereas gold, we do an average gold, a big quantity of gold, 2 to 3 weeks, small quantities within 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
I must admit that from what I know, and you yourself, I'd rather have it in my hands than anybody else's, and the quicker it comes to my hands, absolutely. Yeah. That's the decision I would make.
Yeah. Yeah, we've been a little bit fortunate here, David, that I know that a lot of other bullion dealerships in Australia at the moment are having enormous difficulty providing silver in any denomination. And they're actually recommending to their clients to go and see somebody else and say, we just can't supply you at the moment. That's with silver. We've been fortunate. We've got 3 suppliers, and we've never been let down yet.
Not on delivery.
No, not on delivery. I mean, yes, we can go out to 3 and 4 weeks, as Brian suggested, on silver. And yes, gold has appeal at that point. I agree 100%. But for some bullion dealerships, there isn't anything available, is there?
No, not at all.
Hopefully it stays that way for us and we stay on top of our game.
And what I'm led to believe, David, is the fact that the demand for silver is going to become so high. It's not a matter of clicking your fingers and you can get some more out of the earth, because I've read it's 10 to 13 years before once you discover silver, to get it out into the open, melt it down into bars and coins. That could be 10 years away. So, there's a long wait, but there's a long wait for people to realise this.
Yes.
Well, I know that you guys deal in the physical market, and so do I, but I'm not a dealer, as you know. But I think that's another reason you'll see a run to the shares, because think about the example we're talking about. I have, $1 million. I'm going to put half of it into metals. Well, gold is, 3 weeks out. Silver's, I'm making up numbers, but giving the right idea, 12 weeks out. So now this person goes back and starts thinking about it. Well, what else can I do? Oh, yeah, I can buy, RTZ. I can buy BHP. I can buy, an Australian miner. I can buy a U.S. miner. And I think it may get to that point because this unobtainium, where you can't get it at any price, could happen. I'm not saying would happen. Or it could be a delay of such magnitude and the system is starting to fall and the price keeps going higher and higher daily. It's like, well, I'll just use a silver mining company as a proxy for silver until things lighten up and I can get delivery in a month or in 2 weeks. But maybe that never happens, right?
Yep.
Right.
So now they're saying, okay, well, at least I got this exposure to the silver mine because it's like it's one of the last places to go.
Yes.
And then just think about a one-off or a black swan where one of these purported situations that has a 3-letter designator that purportedly has real silver turns out to not have the amount they say, or is in arrears, or is audited, or fill in the blank.
Mm-hmm.
That's only one. Maybe there's only one out of all of them, but it only takes one, really,
Yes.
for that domino to fall.
Yes.
Now, what do you think will happen? I mean, you will be in a position where Greg Hunter has stated, either you have it or you don't.
Yeah.
I mean, the day you guys say we're done, no, and I'm not trying to put a bad omen. I'm speaking off a lot of knowledge about monetary panics.
Yes.
Because I said from the beginning, when I was ridiculed by almost everybody, that this panic will be greater than any panic because it's a global panic. I mean, when you go into the panic of, the Weimar Republic, you could move to Austria. It could have gone to France. It was basically a nation state that failed. But when the whole globe is failing and everybody on the planet wants to protect what they have, what's going to happen then? And that's why these scenarios could be. So I won't use you guys. I won't use Good as Gold. I won't pick on Darryl and Brian. But there's a dealer here in the United States that says, I'm done. The delivery times are so long, I'm worried about getting it.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've got enough. So the last shipment I've got, I'm calling these guys and calling them up and saying, I'm holding on to it. Now, is it going to get that bad? I'm using an extreme to make a point. My point is, if you can get it now, you better get it now.
Yeah.
Is it going to be available in the future? Oh, yeah. I think there'll always be availability because somebody is going to take that, 2 ounces of silver for a Tesla or whatever. I'm being facetious, but you get my point. That there will be transactions. But as you said, Darryl, there could be a transaction where it's this much in fiat, but if you pay in silver, you know what? It's a pretty heavy discount. I'll take 20% off the sticker if you pay me in silver.
Yes.
So there'll be a lot that's going to happen. I think a year from now. So, I don't know what you're going to call this episode or this interview, but, last one was, basically load up the truck. This one is this the last train out? And then a year from now, it might be we're waving at the train. I don't know.
Like they are very, very wise words coming from a lot of experience. And, people have just got to pay attention to this. They really do. And we've been emphasizing this for a number of years, but the time really is now for sure. Look, I have a final question, David. And look, I just thank you so much for your input today. It's just been fantastic. Last question. Now, this comes from John Adams once again, our chief economist. John is a seriously qualified person, and he's really looking forward to this answer. In a recent interview with Greg Hunter from USA Watchdog, you mentioned that if the price of silver recorded in 1980 was inflation adjusted for today, the price of silver would be around US $600 an ounce. Given this calculation, do you consider or do you expect that the price of silver will be going this high in this current bull market, however long the period that may be, especially given central bank policies around the world at the moment of just throwing everything at it, indicating, we're heading into a hyperinflationary phase. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad we get to end on it. It needs to be qualified. It's a fact that 600 equals 50 if you use the CPI from 1980. So that I won't argue. It's a fact. But we also have to look at another fact, and that is that silver hit $50 on one day.
Correct. Yes.
One day.
Yeah.
So if we're going to base the whole silver market based on one day's price, we're really not thinking very well.
Yeah.
So I'd like to back off of that and look at what the average price of silver was in 1980, which was $20 an ounce. Now, going a year previous, the all-time high for silver was $6. So the average for the following year was 3 times the level that it had a year before. So when monetary demand for silver takes place, it took the all-time high of 6 and multiply it by over a factor of 3 and maintain that price for about a year's time. So if we use that as an idea and we take the price of silver, let's say of 50 as the high of 2011 in nominal terms, and multiply that by 3 or 4, you come out with $150, $200 silver. That, I think, is extremely reasonable if and only if we don't have a complete breakdown of the currency Ponzi scheme where basically people give up on the currency. And I don't think that will happen. I think it will be close enough where people are perceiving it ending. But unfortunately, and this is my thoughts on it, I think that the powers that be, the elitists, if you will, have got a plan A, B, and C already in place to close the banks, stop the stock exchange, and do the reset, where you have to take the Fed coin or some blockchain instrument of their making, or you can't transact business. So I think they've thought this through. But if free markets still exist, no matter how onerous the government entities clamp down on the populace, a lot of the populace will just march to their tune. But there'll be some percentage that won't because they're too free market oriented and too independent. So if we don't have a complete failure of the currency system, then I think 200, I've said 100, it's in writing. I said it in 2003. I'll stick by that as a minimum, but I do think it's an underestimate. But in a fiat Ponzi scheme, it's really infinity. I mean, you can print this stuff to infinity, and that means it becomes absolutely worthless. So what's it worth in price? So the real answer to the question is, what is it that you can measure it against to get a feel for the value? And that would be labor. It could be land. It could be a business. Yeah. It could be a lot of things that you can measure that ounce of silver against. Yeah. So if you measure it against gold, you get about 16 to 1. I think 20 to 1 maybe in today's, but it could be even 10 to 1. So if we're at 70 to 1 now, silver could outperform gold by a great deal to be its historic monetary value. Remember what I said? I said when silver went to $6 in January 1979, yep. And after the huge run to 50, that was one day event, when it settled down and behaved itself, it was because of monetary demand that it stayed at 20, 3 times the previous high of the year before. So if we look at the year before at an inflation adjusted 2011, I forget the number, but let's call it 200 for talking purposes, and multiply that by 3, well, you would come out with 600. So I don't know the paper price. I know it's extremely undervalued. And I know that if to reach fair value, you really should measure it not only against gold, but again, I'll repeat myself, against land, against a business, against labor. Let's look at labor. There used to be a time when you had another day, another dollar. There used to be a comic strip here in the States. If you're my age, you might know about it. And that was because a dollar, which is 3/4 of an ounce of silver, but let's round it up to an ounce for talking purposes, was an average wage for the average worker.
Yeah.
So what is the average now? Well, here in this state, $15 an hour. So what is that, 120 a day?
Yep.
What's 15 times 8? I should do it. 8 is...
Yeah, 120.
120 bucks. So that would be 3/4 of an ounce would equal 120. So add another 25% onto that. So 10 is 12. So 150, 160 bucks an ounce. All right. So there it is in labor terms. And that's under what? Stable conditions.
Yes.
What did I say? I said stable conditions. What is it worth under unstable conditions? What is it as a reserve? What is it if it's the money of last resort?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of factors to think about, and I'm sorry if it was too long an answer, but
No, not at all.
I'm very involved in this, and there's so many angles to take on that question because it's so important.
Yeah.
But if this wasn't important, to me at least, I wouldn't have devoted my life to it. Because there are things that people get and then they get. And what I mean by that is people that have the intellectual curiosity to try to understand how the monetary system works are such a small percentage of the populace, and they're basically ridiculed by the mainstream financial press and the mainstream press. But we have history on our side.
Yes,
and the people that don't understand it are going to live through that moment in history where almost everyone understands it. And it's going to take, it's going to take generations to forget about it. I mean, my parents grew up, my mom particularly, during the Depression, and it affected her whole life.
Yes.
My mom saved everything, rubber bands, newspaper. I mean, it was sad in a way. Now, my dad didn't have that. He saw things differently, and he didn't have as tough a time. And he just moved on with the economy as it was doing, which was really booming in the 50s, 60s, and up to the 70s, really. But my mom could never get over the fact that there wasn't enough of stuff. And I make that to say the last statement, and that is that we're going to go through something similar again. And there's going to be a whole generation or two that's going to realize that money doesn't grow on trees. You can't print wealth, and that we have to rely on ourselves and individuals and wherewithal to actually make the economy work. And it works based on truth. And we've been fed a lie for too long. So Darryl, Brian, thank you so much for having me.
No, look, thank you so much, David. It's the problem is in this world we only experience this about once every 100 years. And you were right in everything you said. And like my parents, of course, who are our parents, are no longer with us, experienced the Great Depression as kids, but we never ever did. And so we've not had those experiences. And so it's all new to our generation. And if it happened every 10 years, as dramatically as it is now, we'd be aware of it, we'd be conscious of what was happening, and we'd all prepare. But that is, in fact, not the case. So, brilliant answer. Thank you so much.
David, just before Darryl finishes, that little bit of experience you're talking about, your mother was able to save rubber bands and things like that. Certainly a story, very quickly. My mother-in-law just recently passed away. She's at 95. And one of her grandchildren was over one day and said, look, I need this special cloth to do this project. And of course, grandmother goes away, Nana goes away, goes to a closet, picks out all these different types of materials and whatever. Here we are, we've got what you take. So she'd been saving these materials right through the Depression, closets full of stuff, right? But there you go. They saved, because they didn't know when they'd be able to get it again.
Yes. Yeah. David, my lifetime mentor, gentleman by the name of Peter Daniels, came up with many quotes, but one was, be careful who you listen to. And the important thing here is, I'd like to believe, I hope, that our viewers today have really taken heed by what you've said. What I'd like to do, of course, David, is remind them that of the Morgan Report, of course, and you're the publisher of the Morgan Report. What I'd like you to do, if you could, please, advise our viewers and our subscribers as to how they might be able to engage in the Morgan Report, what they might receive from you. What is the process? Because I just think to be able to connect with somebody like David Morgan is just an opportunity that is rare and should be taken advantage of. So if you could just explain to us, David, how that process might take place, I'd really appreciate it.
Sure. Well, thank you for that opportunity. The easiest thing is go to our main page. It's themorganreport.com. And on the right-hand side, you can get our free newsletter, which is published a few times a week of anything I do in the public domain, and it's for free. If you're inclined to get the next level of leverage, and I talked about briefly on the mining shares, also ETFs and that type of thing, you can go to the subscribe button and pull that down and read our sales letter and video and make a decision whether or not that's an opportunity that you want to pursue.
Thank you, David. And look, I'd hope that many of our viewers and subscribers will take advantage of that offer. As I will repeat, to connect with somebody like David is a unique opportunity and one that should be taken advantage of. It could change your life, and I mean that sincerely. To thank you again, David. Look, really appreciate your time. I know you're an exceptionally busy man, and you've spent a great deal of time with us this morning. Very much appreciated. We thank you so much. To our viewers and our subscribers, who are also vitally important to us, they are wonderfully supportive of this channel. We'd like to say thank you to you as well. Most importantly, until next time, stay well, stay focused, and goodbye for now.
Bye for now.
Thank you, David.